I did some boots on the ground in St. Louis, Missouri, and I realized that there's two specific pieces of architecture that actually prove that St. Louis is an ancient Bible city. Specifically, it's the city called Bethel or Luz in the Old Testament. I'll show you how this gate right here, which is a well-known gate called the Gateway Arch, I'll show you how this gate is proof that this is the ancient city of Luz or Bethel. And an even stronger piece of evidence of this is this pillar right here, which is called the world's tallest Corinthian column, and it is the biblical marker marking the location of the ancient city Bethel or Luz from the Old Testament. And this is a heavy topic because if St. Louis, Missouri is the ancient location of the city known as Bethel or Luz, then it means that the USA is the land that was promised to Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and Joseph. And that what's going on in the Middle East, calling that the Holy Land, calling that the location that was promised to Abraham, Jacob, and Joseph, that would mean that what's going on over there is a hoax. And just to recap where this idea of a promised land comes from, it comes from the Old Testament, and specifically God made a covenant, a promise to a man named Abraham. So right here in Genesis 17:7, God says, "I will establish my covenant between me and thee and thy seed after thee in their generations for an everlasting covenant, to be a God unto thee and to thy seed after thee." So he promises Abraham and all of Abraham's descendants that he will be their God for forever and he will not abandon them. And this is why oftentimes in the scriptures it refers to them as the wife of the covenant, and that God is the husband because he's married to them. He can't divorce them. He made this promise with Abraham and all of his children for forever, and he's never ever going to go back on that promise. And then the other part of that covenant is that God promised them a certain location of land that he said is the most choice land above all the other lands. It's the best, most choice location of all the land on earth. And then because Abraham dies, but the promise that God made is that through his seed this covenant will continue, then there's children of Abraham that also received this same covenant, and it's said that through their generations, through their posterity, the covenant will continue. So there's a grandchild of Abraham called Jacob, and this is where the name Israel comes from, because Jacob's name was just simply changed to Israel. The Israel in the scriptures is not talking about a country, it's talking about a man named Jacob and his children, the continuation of the covenant made to Abraham and all of his posterity happening through Jacob, whose name got changed to Israel. All of his children is known as the house of Israel, the tribes of Israel, or the Israelites. So the name Israel is first referring to Jacob, and then oftentimes is used to refer to Jacob's children, the house of Israel, the tribes of Israel, or the Israelites. But never in the Old Testament is it referring to a country in the Middle East called Israel. And the country in the Middle East that is called Israel, I'm not going to go very in depth with this right now, but just to touch on it, and for a more in-depth breakdown, you can see my Stone Woman playlist, which I'll also leave linked in the description of this video. But Israel in the Middle East, as we think of it and know of it and are told a lot about it, and we constantly hear yapping about it, that Israel was created in 1948 basically by the United Nations, and before that it was called British Palestine. But a group of world rulers got together and said, yeah, let's create this place called Israel, capital city Jerusalem, and they've been telling us all that that's the Holy Land when it's actually not. I'll leave that at that for now, and we'll just start to touch on these architectural markers, these biblical markers that show that in Missouri, that show that the United States really is the land promised to Abraham and Jacob, or Israel because his name got changed to Israel, and Joseph of Egypt, who was next in line to receive that covenant. But when Jacob receives that covenant, this is where we learn the most about this specific location of land that God promised to them. And we learn that Jacob marked that location with a very specific type of architecture, which is the pillar that I showed you at the beginning of this video. So in Genesis 28:4, this is God speaking to Jacob, or speaking to Israel, and he says to him, "I'm giving you the blessing of Abraham to thee and to thy seed with thee, that thou mayest inherit the land which God gave unto Abraham." And then Jacob proceeds to have a dream, and it says that in that dream he beheld a ladder set up on earth, and the top of it reached to heaven, and he beheld angels of God ascending and descending on it. And then it says that the Lord stood above that ladder, Genesis 28:13 now, and he said to Jacob, to Israel, I am the God of your father Abraham, and the land whereon thou liest, to thee will I give it, and to thy seed. And then Jacob awakened out of his sleep and said, oh, surely the Lord is in this place, and I knew it not. So Jacob didn't realize quite where he was at. He has this dream. God speaks to him and says, where you're lying right now, that's the location that I promised to Abraham, and I'm promising it to you now, and continuing this covenant through you and all of your seed. And Jacob wakes up and goes, oh, I didn't realize where I was at. And then he goes in Genesis 28:17, how dreadful is this place? This is none other but the house of God. This is the gate of heaven. This is where we start to get this gate architecture being talked about in this specific location. Genesis 28:19 says he called the name of that place Bethel, but the name of that city was called Luz at the first. So Jacob's, or Israel, because his name got changed to Israel, is calling this place Bethel. But he's also, the scriptures are also telling us that before he started calling it Bethel, it was called Luz. And it says it was called Luz at the first, Adam's time period. Adam was the first, Adam was the beginning. If there's a special location that God says is the most blessed location, then that's probably and is where Adam and also Noah were. But specifically, Jacob right here is naming that place Bethel, and also letting us know that at the beginning it was called Luz, which translation for Luz means light, and the translation for Bethel means house of God. So we see right here in these couple verses that God is promising Jacob this land, which was the land that was promised to Abraham. But then we're getting even more specific insights about it. It's not just a land that God chose for these people. We're learning that this is the house of God location on earth. This is the gate between heaven and earth. And then Jacob proceeds to mark this spot with a specific marker. Genesis 28:22 says, this stone which I have set for a pillar shall be God's house. So this is often referred to as Jacob's pillar. This is what I'm going to point out is what we now refer to as the Grand Ave water tower, which is also known as the world's tallest Corinthian column. So here's an older picture of it when the roads were still dirt, which is always interesting. All this stone architecture, all these stone buildings, and the weight of them is tremendous, but they never paved roads, no stone for roads, just a mighty, mighty pillar stacked of perfectly straight stone surrounded by a bunch of stone buildings. But this is an older picture of it, and here's a newer picture of it, and you can see how tall it truly is. These cranes right here is just to get these guys up there to be able to paint it a little bit. Like, this is a tremendously, tremendously tall pillar right here. Like I already mentioned, it's known as the Grand Avenue Water Tower. They say it's an old decommissioned water tower that was built in 1871. But when we read about it, there's a little bit more to learn about it here. The tower is the tallest freestanding Corinthian column in the world at approximately 154 feet tall. And it is much taller than the freestanding Corinthian columns of Pompeii, or the column of the Goths in Istanbul, or the colonnades at the Temple of Jupiter in Baalbek. It's taller than any of this ancient pillar architecture anywhere else. This one's taller by quite a bit, is much more grander, and is not actually an old water tower, but it is actually the old pillar that Jacob built. And we see right here that there used to be a standpipe and internal spiral staircase, they say, that was removed. But then they say the staircase was replaced by what? What are the chances that we're looking at the world's tallest Corinthian column, Jacob's pillar, and he had a dream about a ladder set up, and after he had that dream, he built a pillar to mark the location, and here's this world's tallest Corinthian column, and what do they talk about there is inside of it? A vertical ladder. Chance? Or are we looking at Jacob's pillar right here, Israel's pillar, still standing in its original location, the city of Luz, the city of Bethel, the God's house, the gate between heaven and earth location, the location promised to Abraham and then to Jacob named Israel. And that pillar sits right up here, right on this Mississippi River, the mightiest river as it's often known. So this right here, with almost the very center of it being St. Louis, Missouri, where the world's tallest Corinthian pillar stands, well, if that's Jacob's pillar, then it's marking the God's house on earth location, the promised land location, and that would make this Mississippi River Valley Israel Valley. That means these are the Bible lands. These are the Bible locations. This is the spot, the most choice, blessed land that was promised to Abraham and all of his seed for forever. So once again, here's the water tower up here. And then just right here, we've got the arch. And the arch is also known as a gate. And just like we read when Jacob marked this house of God location, it was also the gate of heaven location. And right here we have the world's tallest Corinthian pillar, and we have a gate. Here's another look at it. Here's the world's tallest Corinthian column right here. And then right out here in the distance, there's the gateway arch. And what is exactly the gateway arch? What's the point of it? Why is it there? What do they say about it? They say that the arch is a boundary line between the western and eastern halves of the country. And they say it was designed to symbolize the opening of the West. So they're very much saying this is a symbol of east to west. It's a symbol of traveling from east to west, and it's a symbol of entering the west from the east. And in Matthew 24:27 right here, talking about the second coming of Jesus Christ, his return to reign on earth, it says that it'll be as the light coming out of the east and shineth even unto the west. So shall be the coming of the Son of Man. And then in Ezekiel 43:2, we read that the glory of the God of Israel is the God of Jacob, the God of Abraham. That's what that Israel's meaning, and also all of their children, the tribes of Israel, the house of Israel. The glory of the God of Israel came from the way of the east to west again. Psalms 113:3, the rising of the sun unto the going down of the same, the sun rises in the east and sets in the west. The Lord's name is to be praised. So several times in the scriptures, specifically God's second coming is an east to west thing. But then there's also other verses where it's saying the same thing, like God is this east to west thing. And so you've got this ancient pillar right here, Jacob's pillar, and then you have this gate over here, and it says that it's the symbol of east to west. And then also, this is just off of the Wikipedia page, but what's being said right here is that the people were talking to the architect about the gateway arch and being like, what's the point of it? Why don't we do something more practical? And his response is spiritual things were equally important, saying that the gateway arch is a spiritual marker. It's a marker of this ancient covenant that God made with Abraham, Jacob, whose name got changed to Israel, and Joseph, and that this east to west thing is Jesus Christ, and this whole thing is marking that location and that story. And there's two other locations that exist in Missouri that tell this story even more completely. Like this one right here, right outside of Kansas City, there's a city called Independence, Missouri. And how I told you that the UN invented the fake Israel location, well, they have the real Israel location very much marked with what they call their only memorial in the world to the peacekeeping forces of the United Nations. Let me break down what that actually means. So this temple site right here is what the United Nations calls its only memorial in the world to the peacekeeping forces of the United Nations, also known as the United Nations Peace Plaza. But what this sign is saying right here is that this is a temple site, and it's saying August 3rd, 1831, Joseph Smith Jr., prophet and founder of the Church of Christ, nowadays known as the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, or the Mormons. He was the founder of that church, and with 7 other church leaders dedicated this site for the temple in the city of Zion, where this church believes the Lord will come to his people in the last days. Right here in the dead center of this circle that I drew is this temple site, this United Nations Peace Plaza, the only memorial in the world to the peacekeeping forces of the United Nations. And I set that circle so that the very edge of it is where the gate is located in St. Louis right here. And I drew the circle just a little bit wider so we could clearly see St. Louis marked right there. But if that's the gate, and the gate is an entrance, and there's this east to west thing happening, well, then it makes this site right here extra interesting because of what's being claimed about this site. And then we'll see that it's not a hocus pocus nonsense claim, or else the United Nations would have nothing to do with it. But the United Nations very much likes this site, and in fact, it's the United Nations' only memorial in the world to its peacekeeping forces. And so if we come back to the sign right here, it's saying that Joseph Smith, the founder of the Mormon Church, the guy who translated the Book of Mormon, he came here to this site And he said that this was the place where Jesus Christ will come, his return in the last days. And that he specifically called this place the center place of Zion. And that's why I put it right here as the dead center, because it's supposed to be the center place of God's house on earth. And then over here you have the gate, the gateway arch, the gate between heaven and earth, the Jacob's pillar spot marking the entrance into this location as a whole, which I totally get if you want to call the Mormon church and Joseph Smith and the Book of Mormon, if you just want to call all that bunk and made up nonsense, like, I totally get that. But then why is the United Nations involved in this site right here? Not only involved, but they're like claiming it as their special place. If we come back to this United Nations Peace Plaza right here and read a little bit about it, it says the United Nations Peace Plaza in Independence, Missouri, described by its creators as the only memorial in the world to the person serving in the peacekeeping forces of the United Nations. And then it gives us even more information about what's going on right here in this location. It says that upon signing the United Nations Charter in San Francisco on June 26, 1945, President Harry Truman arrived in Independence, Missouri the next day. So the President of the United States signs the United States into the United Nations Charter, and the very next day, his next order of business is to go to this temple site in Independence, Missouri, this Mormon Joseph Smith temple site in Independence, Missouri, right when the President of the United States signs the charter to put the United States into the United Nations. His next order of business is to go to this specific location. Why? Well, if this temple site really is what this sign says right here, it's a site dedicated for the temple of the city of Zion, the center place of Zion, where Jesus Christ will return in the last days, well, then that would be a very, very special site to have your hand in, or to own, or to place your only memorial in the world in that location. Literally anywhere else in the whole world you could pick for the only memorial in the world to the peacekeeping forces of the United Nations, but you chose the Mormon temple lot in small town Independence, Missouri? Why? Why would you ever choose that place? The place that also is claimed to be the center place of Zion, the temple site for the return of Jesus Christ. That also matches the center place if you place the gate and the pillar as the entrance from east to west into the city of God. Is there something much grander going on in these locations? Are these actual biblical sites, not just some random ones from the scriptures? Is this not the location promised to Abraham and Jacob and Joseph? And that's why there's this pillar over here and gate as the entrance, and the dead center of it is this Independence, Missouri site, an ancient temple site where it was predicted that Jesus Christ will return in the last days. And the United Nations is 100% one of the devil's main organizations. I understand they say a lot of nice things, they try and make promises about peace and prosperity and all this stuff, but it's just twisted language when what they really do is enslave and destroy and lie and deceive. Peacekeeping forces, that's the devil. God does not enforce peace. He lets it get super, super messy, and he made this whole plan so that all this gets cleaned up and judged perfectly eventually when he says it's time for all that to happen. But he's never enforcing peace upon anybody. But then there's this United Nations Peace Plaza, the only memorial in the world to the peacekeeping forces, and it's on the Mormon temple lot in small town Independence, Missouri. The United Nations is like the grandest organization. It literally controls other nations. Just like the United States government united all the different states into one government, the United Nations unites all the nations into one government. It's the thing that rules over the nations. And out of all the places on earth they could have picked for their only memorial in the world to the peacekeeping forces of the United Nations, they chose the silly made-up story Mormon temple lot in Independence, Missouri. And the day after, the next order of business, after the President of the United States signs the country into the United Nations, next order of business, Mormon temple lot in Independence, Missouri. And the reason that Joseph Smith went to this place in Independence, Missouri is because he said that God told him this is the center place of Zion, the place promised to Abraham, Jacob, and Joseph, and that what Joseph Smith was doing was the continuation of that ancient covenant. And the Book of Mormon that everybody thinks talks about all this weird stuff that you've heard about the Mormons doesn't talk about any of that stuff. It's a book that he claimed Joseph Smith translated from ancient Egyptian into English, and the introduction of that book says it's a record of God's dealings with the ancient inhabitants of the Americas. It gives a record, an account of two great civilizations, one that came from Jerusalem in 600 BC and separated into two nations known as the Nephites and the Lamanites. And that family that escaped out of Jerusalem, when you just read like the first few chapters of the Book of Mormon, it explains that they were descendants of the tribe of Joseph, who was a son of Jacob, and that the Lord covenanted with them that they would be taken back to that inheritance land, that promised land, that covenant location, and that covenant would continue through them. And that's where the Native American Indians come from, is they're the remnant of the civilizations talked about in the Book of Mormon. And then there's another very interesting location in Missouri, which is this one right up here, just a little bit north of Independence, Missouri. So you got St. Louis over here with the Jacob's Pillar and the gate, and then you've got Independence right here, which is the center place of Zion, the Mormon temple lot, or the UN Peace Plaza, the only memorial in the world to the peacekeeping forces of the United Nations. And then right up here you have a place that's called Adam-ondi-Ahman. This is the name right here, Adam-ondi-Ahman. And what this place is supposedly is the place where Adam was when he got kicked out of the garden, which would make sense because if we go back to Noah, it said that God established his covenant with Noah, which was before Abraham, and before Noah, it was Adam, and Adam was the first man, so God definitely covenanted with him. So it's very easy to say that this covenant that God made with Abraham and then Jacob and then Joseph, well, he had previously made that covenant with Noah, and before Noah with Adam. And guess what? All of that is right here in this one Missouri location. The Jacob's Pillar location, marked with his pillar and the gate, which means that's the Abraham location. And then you also have Joseph Smith and the Mormons and the United Nations group, which is the devil's group, saying, yeah, this is a special place right here, Independence, Missouri. And then also it's been said that right north of that is Adam-ondi-Ahman, where Adam used to live, all in this one small section. That all is right off of the Mississippi River, the mightiest river, which feeds this entire land right here, which is the land that blesses all the other nations on earth, which is the land that stands up for freedom and liberty and should be standing up for Jesus Christ, although that's definitely been dwindling a lot over the last years. But this is the land promised to Abraham, Jacob, and Joseph. This is God's most choice land. This is his house on earth location. This is the ancient Bible lands location. I'll be making another video soon solely about Independence, Missouri, talk a lot about the Mormons and a lot more about the United Nations. So that'll be a really good one if you're interested in hearing more about that specific location. You can also go to this playlist, the Stone Woman playlist on my We Zombie Rod of Iron channel, and I break this down very, very thoroughly through all of these videos, like this one right here, video 4 of 12, Jacob's Pillar still stands in its original location. This one right here, video 6 of 12, I talk about the invention of a fake Israel. And then in this video right here, 10 of 12, I call it the real Jerusalem no one's talking about, where I break down the old Jerusalem and the new Jerusalem and their real locations, which isn't in the Middle East.